The gray water sloshed in the bucket, a miniature contained storm that mirrored the turbulence in her own thoughts. Anya Sharma dragged the heavy mop across the polished concrete floor of the Tactical Operations Center, her movements a study in fluid efficiency. Each pass overlapped the last by precisely 1 inch, leaving no streaks, no missed patches. It was a simple task, but she approached it with the same disciplined focus she applied to everything. The smell of ammonia and disinfectant cut through the stale air, a scent she had come to associate with invisibility. To the men who strode through this room, she was just part of the background, a ghost in a gray jumpsuit who pushed a mop. The door hissed open, and Sergeant Rex Thorne entered with his team, their boots scuffing the floor she had just finished. They moved with the loud, confident energy of men who believed the world was built for them to conquer. Thorne, a thick-necked man with a jaw that seemed permanently clenched, was holding a steaming mug. He saw her, his eyes flicking over her as if she were a piece of furniture, and then he smirked at his men. "Clear the way, sweetheart," he said, his voice a low rumble of casual condescension. "The adults have work to do." One of the younger operators snickered. Anya did not react. She simply shifted her weight, pulling the mop and bucket back to give them a wider path. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor, on the steady rhythm of her work. This was the key to her survival here: to be silent, to be still, to be nothing. Thorne, perhaps annoyed by her lack of response, made a theatrical gesture of looking at the massive holographic map dominating the far wall. As he turned, his elbow dipped and the ceramic mug slipped from his grasp. It did not shatter. It landed with a heavy thud, splashing a wave of dark, steaming coffee across the pristine floor, inches from her worn boots. The liquid spread like a dark wound on the pale gray concrete. Thorne clicked his tongue in mock annoyance. "Clumsy me," he said, not looking at her. "Better get that. Wouldn't want it to stain." His team moved on, their laughter echoing softly as they gathered around the tactical table. They did not offer to help. They did not apologize. They simply expected her to clean up their mess, another small, insignificant task for the insignificant woman who haunted the edges of their important world. Anya stood motionless for a full 3 seconds, her knuckles white where she gripped the handle of the mop. She felt the familiar cold burn of anger deep in her gut, a feeling she had learned to metabolize into fuel. She took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it out through her nose. Then, she dipped the mop back into the bucket, wrung it out with a practiced twist of her wrists, and began to clean the spill. As the mop head absorbed the coffee, her eyes lifted from the floor. She looked past the smirking operators, past the banks of humming servers, and focused on the holographic map. It displayed a complex urban grid, overlaid with red icons indicating enemy positions and blue icons for friendly forces. Her eyes traced a specific flight path, a subtle, low-altitude approach vector that no one else seemed to have considered. It was a dangerous route, threading a needle between known anti-aircraft emplacements, but it offered the one thing their current plan lacked: complete surprise. Her mind, a machine built for complex calculations, analyzed the variables: wind speed, radar shadows, response times. It would work. She knew it with an unshakable certainty. She finished cleaning the spill, the floor once again a seamless sheet of gray. She was invisible again. But she had seen the flaw in their plan. And in this place, a single flaw was all it took to get men like Sergeant Thorne killed. She finished her work, the soft squeak of her mop the only sound that acknowledged her existence. The forward operating base, designated Scorpion's Nest, was a temporary scar on an ancient landscape. HESCO barriers and concertina wire formed a perimeter around a cluster of prefabricated buildings that shimmered in the relentless desert heat. The air tasted of dust and diesel fumes. It was a place of perpetual tension, a holding pen for violence waiting to be unleashed. Anya's world was circumscribed by the clang of metal, the drone of generators, and the distant rhythmic whump of artillery practice. She moved through it like a shadow, her gray janitorial jumpsuit a perfect camouflage against the concrete and steel. The men of Alpha Team, Thorne's unit, were the apex predators of this ecosystem. They were special tactics operators, a hybrid of combat controllers and pararescue men, trained to operate at the bleeding edge of conflict. Their gear was the best, their bodies were honed weapons, and their arrogance was a shield as effective as their body armor. They saw Anya every day in the mess hall, in the corridors, in the command center. They looked through her. She was the janitor, the cleaning lady, a function, not a person. Only one person on the entire base treated her as a human being. Master Sergeant Frank Cole was a logistics NCO who had seen 3 decades of war from behind a supply ledger. He was a man with deep lines etched around his eyes, not from stress, but from watching generations of young, arrogant soldiers march off to battles he had to equip. He never failed to nod at her, a simple gesture of acknowledgement that felt like a lifeline in a sea of dismissive glances. One afternoon, as she was wiping down the windows of the mess hall, he approached her, holding out a cold bottle of water. "You're going to dehydrate out here, ma'am," he said, his voice raspy from years of shouting over engine noise. Anya paused, surprised. She took the bottle, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. "Thank you, Master Sergeant." He leaned against the wall beside her, looking out, at the shimmering heat haze rising from the runway. "They give you enough supplies? Cleaners, rags, all that?" "Yes, I have what I need." "Good," he nodded. "These guys," he gestured vaguely toward the barracks where Alpha Team was quartered. "They can be a handful. Think because they're Tier 1, the normal rules don't apply. Just don't let them get to you." He saw something in her eyes then, a flicker of intelligence and discipline that didn't quite fit the role she was playing. He had seen it before, in analysts and spies who wore camouflage of a different sort. But he didn't press. He just gave her a small, respectful smile and walked away, leaving her with the cold bottle of water and a rare feeling of being seen. The base was on high alert. The target was a rogue general who had acquired a shipment of sophisticated electronic warfare technology. He was holed up in a fortified compound in the heart of a dense city 100 miles away. Alpha Team's mission was to infiltrate, neutralize the general, and secure the tech. The plan, as Anya had overheard during her silent cleaning sessions, was a classic hammer and anvil approach. A ground team to assault the compound, while an A-10 Warthog provided close air support, circling overhead to eliminate any resistance. It was a solid plan, but it relied on perfect communication and predictable enemy behavior. 2 things this part of the world seldom offered. Anya had seen the flaw in their approach vector, but it was not her place to speak. Her place was to push a mop and remain invisible, a silent observer in a world of loud, confident men who were about to walk into a trap. The day before the mission, the underestimation reached its peak. Alpha Team was in the armory, a cavernous space filled with the smell of gun oil and metal, conducting their final weapons and equipment checks. Anya was tasked with sweeping the floors, a job that required her to navigate a maze of Pelican cases, disassembled rifles, and preoccupied soldiers. She moved with quiet grace, her broom making soft rhythmic whispers against the concrete. Thorne was demonstrating a new breaching charge to his team. He held it up, explaining its properties with the smug authority of a professor. "This is the new thermobaric strip. It'll peel a steel door like a banana without sending shrapnel into the next room." He finished his explanation and tossed the inert training device carelessly onto a nearby workbench. It rolled off, clattering loudly to the floor directly in Anya's path. She stopped. The small cylindrical object lay at her feet. Thorne looked at her, a challenge in his eyes. "You gonna get that, or are you just gonna stand there?" One of the other operators, a younger man named Vance with a nervous energy about him, started to move. "I got it, Sarge." "Stay put, Vance," Thorne snapped, his eyes still locked on Anya. "She's the janitor. It's her job to pick things up." The air in the room grew thick with tension. The other members of the team stopped what they were doing, watching the silent confrontation. Anya's face remained a blank mask, but her mind was a whirlwind. This was a test, a deliberate act of humiliation designed to reinforce her powerlessness and his dominance. To bend down and pick it up would be to accept the role he had assigned her. To refuse would be an act of defiance that could compromise her entire mission here. She held his gaze for a long moment. Her stillness was more unnerving than any angry retort could have been. Then, without breaking eye contact, she nudged the breaching charge with the toe of her boot, sliding it a few inches to the side, out of her path. She did not bend. She did not pick it up. She simply moved it, an object in her way, and then continued sweeping as if he wasn't there. A low growl emanated from Thorne's chest. He took a step toward her, his face darkening with rage. He was not used to being ignored, especially not by someone he considered less than nothing. "Did you hear me?" he said, his voice dangerously low. Before he could take another step, Master Sergeant Cole's voice cut through the tension like a razor. "Thorne!" Thorne stopped, turning to see the older NCO standing in the doorway, his arms crossed. Cole's expression was mild, but his eyes were like chips of ice. "You and your team have a final mission brief with the Colonel in 5 minutes, Cole said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I suggest you stop harassing the civilian staff and get your gear in order." Thorne's jaw tightened. Being dressed down by a logistics NCO in front of his own men was a stinging blow to his ego. He shot Anya one last venomous glare before turning to his team. "You heard him. Let's move." As they filed out of the armory, their bravado momentarily punctured, Cole walked over to where Anya was sweeping. He looked down at the breaching charge still lying on the floor. He didn't say anything about the confrontation. He just bent down, picked it up, and placed it securely on the workbench. "Some people," he said, shaking his head slowly, "mistake their rank for a license to be a fool." Anya just nodded and continued her work, the steady whisper of her broom a quiet act of defiance in a world that tried to render her silent. The command center was a hive of controlled chaos. The final simulation for Alpha Team's mission was underway, a complex digital rehearsal designed to iron out any last-minute kinks. Monitors displayed drone feeds, communications traffic, and biometric data from the operators. Thorne and his team were plugged in from a separate chamber, running through the infiltration scenario in a virtual environment. The mood was tense. This simulation was the last gateway before the real thing. Suddenly, a cascade of error messages flooded the main screen. The virtual targeting system, which linked the ground team to the A-10 Warthog in the simulation, froze. Red warning lights began to flash. The drone feed dissolved into a screen of digital static. "What's going on?" the base commander, Colonel Jennings, demanded from his position on the command platform. Airman Leo Vance, the team's young communications specialist, was frantically typing at his console, his face pale. "I don't know, sir. The targeting software is caught in some kind of loop. It's not responding to any commands. I'm locked out." Panic began to ripple through the room. The simulation was not just a game. It was running on the same core software that would be used in the actual mission. If they could not fix this glitch, the entire operation could be jeopardized. The A-10 support was critical. Without it, Alpha Team would be going in blind and vulnerable. "Reboot the system," Jennings ordered. "I can't, sir," Vance said, his voice strained. "The loop is preventing a hard reset. It's like the system is eating itself." Anya was in the corner of the room, cleaning the large glass partition that separated the main floor from a small observation deck. She'd been wiping the same spot for the last 2 minutes, her movements slow and deliberate, her attention focused not on the glass but on a secondary diagnostic monitor near Vance's station. It was scrolling with lines of raw code, a waterfall of data that was meaningless to almost everyone in the room. But not to her. She saw the problem instantly, a single, elegant, and catastrophic error in the code. She set her spray bottle and cloth down on her cart. The small, distinct click of the plastic on metal was barely audible over the rising panic, but it seemed to cut through the noise. She walked calmly and quietly toward Vance's console. Thorne's voice crackled over the intercom from the simulation chamber. "What the hell is happening out there? Our systems are dead. We're sitting ducks." As Anya approached, a lieutenant noticed her and moved to intercept. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area. You need to—" Anya did not even look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. She stopped just behind Vance's chair and spoke, her voice quiet but clear, carrying an authority that made the lieutenant freeze. "That string is recursive," she said, pointing a single steady finger at a line of code on the diagnostic monitor. "The conditional statement is flawed. It's creating an infinite logic loop that's consuming all available processing power." Vance spun around in his chair, his eyes wide with disbelief. Everyone turned to look at her, the janitor, standing there in her drab gray jumpsuit, speaking a language only a handful of them understood. Thorne's voice boomed over the intercom again, laced with scorn. "What would a janitor know about code? Get her out of there." Colonel Jennings, however, was a man who cared about results, not appearances. He looked from Vance's panicked face to Anya's preternaturally calm one. Let her speak. Anya's gaze did not waver from the screen. She spoke directly to Vance, her tone that of a clinical instructor. The graphical user interface is compromised. You cannot fix it from the front end. You need to access the command line. Vance stared at her, dumbfounded. I don't know how. Open a terminal window, Anya commanded softly. I will tell you what to type. Desperate and out of options, Vance did as he was told. A black window with a blinking cursor appeared on his screen. Type sudo kill 9, followed by the process ID of the targeting application, she instructed. Then purge the system cache. The GUI is trapping the error. You have to kill the process at the root level. Her instructions were precise, confident, and utterly alien coming from the woman they only knew as the person who emptied their trash cans. Vance's fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the commands she dictated. The moment he hit enter, the cascade of error messages on the main screen stopped. The red lights went out. The drone feed flickered back to life, showing a stable image of the virtual compound. The targeting system's interface reappeared, clean and responsive. A profound silence fell over the command center. The operators stared at the restored screens, then at Anya, then back again. Vance slowly turned in his chair, looking up at her with an expression of pure awe. From the simulation chamber, there was only static. Thorne was speechless. Colonel Jennings descended from his platform, his eyes narrowed in a new, sharp assessment of the woman in the gray jumpsuit. He stopped in front of her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice low. Anya met his gaze for a brief second, then her eyes dropped. She picked up her spray bottle and cloth from her cart. "Just the janitor, sir," she said quietly. "I spilled some water. I'll clean it up." She turned and walked back to the glass partition, leaving a room full of stunned soldiers in her wake. The first, deep crack in their perception of her had appeared, and it was wider and more unnerving than any of them could have imagined. The mission launched under the bruised purple sky of pre-dawn. 2 helicopters, their rotors beating a rhythmic tattoo against the cooling desert air, lifted off and banked hard to the east, carrying Thorne and Alpha Team toward their destiny. In the command center, the atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. Anya was there, ostensibly to clean, but everyone was acutely aware of her presence. Glances were stolen in her direction, whispers died when she drew near. She had become a mystery, a ghost who knew how to speak the language of their machines. 40 minutes into the flight, the first sign of trouble appeared. Vance, monitoring the communications link, frowned at his screen. "Sir, I'm getting a lot of signal. Degradation on the primary comms channel. Heavy interference." Colonel Jennings leaned over the console. "Is it the terrain?" "Negative, sir," Vance replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "This isn't natural. It's deliberate. It's sophisticated. Far more than we anticipated." And then it happened. One by one, the screens went black. The encrypted radio link to Alpha Team dissolved into a roar of white noise. The drone feed vanished. The GPS trackers for the operators winked out. In the space of 5 seconds, the command center went from a state of total information awareness to complete blindness. Red emergency lights bathed the room in a hellish glow. "What was that?" Jennings demanded. "A coordinated electronic warfare attack, sir," a signals intelligence officer called out, his voice tight with alarm. "They've blinded us. All channels are down. We have no contact with Alpha Team." As if on cue, a series of explosions rocked the base from the south perimeter. The building shuddered, and dust rained down from the ceiling tiles. An alarm began to blare, a shrill, piercing sound that signaled a ground assault. The situation had inverted with breathtaking speed. The hunters had become the hunted. The remote operation they were managing was now a distant problem. The immediate threat was a full-scale attack on their own position. The rogue general had not just been waiting for them in his compound. He had brought the fight to them. Thorne's voice, a ghost from a severed connection, had been cut off mid-sentence. Approaching the initial drop point, all indicators are green. We are silence. The command center, moments before a model of technological superiority, was now little more than a concrete bunker filled with useless equipment and frightened men. The operators, trained for combat, grabbed their rifles and moved to defensive positions, their faces grim. The carefully constructed layers of technology that had given them such confidence had been peeled away, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. Anya had been standing by her cart when the attack began. She did not flinch at the explosions. She did not react to the alarms. She simply stood still, her head tilted slightly as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. She was observing, processing, analyzing. The chaos in the room was just data to her. Colonel Jennings was barking orders, trying to establish a chain of command amidst the bedlam. "Get me a hard line to the perimeter defense. I want a sit rep now. Someone try to raise the A-10 on the emergency frequency." But it was no use. The electronic attack was comprehensive. It had severed every conventional line of communication, turning their advanced base into an isolated, deaf and blind island in a sea of hostility. The enemy was inside the wire. Distant gunfire, sharp and sporadic, confirmed it. They were being systematically dismantled. The arrogance and confidence that had filled the room just an hour before had evaporated, replaced by the primal, metallic taste of fear. A sandstorm, a malevolent brown wall that swallowed the horizon, chose that exact moment to descend upon the base. The wind howled, a banshee's shriek that rattled the window panes and forced its way through every crack in the building. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The world outside the command center became a churning vortex of sand and fury. The few security cameras on the perimeter that were still operational now showed nothing but a blinding, grainy blur. The storm was the perfect cover for the attackers. The base's automated sentry guns, reliant on clear lines of sight, were rendered useless. The snipers on the watchtowers were effectively blindfolded. The assault, which had been sporadic, now intensified, the sound of explosions and automatic weapons fire growing closer, punctuated by the alien whistle of incoming mortar rounds. The chaos in the command center deepened. The electronic warfare attack had crippled their systems, and now the environment itself had turned against them. They were fighting a ghost army in a blinding storm. "Where is that A-10?" Colonel Jennings roared, his voice hoarse. "It's our only asset in the air." "Still no contact, sir," Vance shouted back over the din. "The pilot is flying on instruments, but he's blind to what's happening on the ground. The storm is blocking all satellite and radio frequencies. He's up there, but he might as well be on the moon." The A-10 Warthog, callsign Warthog Actual, was their only hope. A flying fortress of a plane built around a 7-barreled cannon that fired 30mm depleted uranium shells at a rate of 3,900 rounds per minute. It was the ultimate close air support weapon, but without targeting data, without a voice to guide it. It was just a machine burning fuel in the sky. A mortar round landed close by, the explosion a deafening concussion that blew out the main windows of the command center. Sand and wind blasted into the room, whipping papers into the air and stinging the faces of the operators. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into the dim, terrifying glow of the red emergency lighting. The main power grid was down. It was in this moment of absolute crisis, with technology broken and the natural world raging, that the institutional hierarchy collapsed. Rank, ego, and procedure became meaningless concepts. All that mattered was survival. The carefully constructed order of the military base had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, desperate need for a solution. Any solution, and in the red-tinged darkness, a single, calm figure began to move. Anya Sharma pushed her cleaning cart to the side, its wheels making a small, unnoticed squeak on the floor. Her time for being invisible was over. Anya walked through the swirling dust and chaos of the command center with a purpose that seemed to defy the panic around her. She did not run. Her steps were measured, her posture erect. She moved directly toward the primary communications console, now dark and inert. The operators who saw her move parted before her, their faces a mixture of confusion and desperation. They were soldiers trained to follow orders, but the orders had stopped. Colonel Jennings saw her approach, his face streaked with grime. "What are you doing?" "The conventional systems are compromised," Anya said, her voice cutting through the noise with an unnatural calm. "But this base is a test site for the X7 comms suite. It operates on a quantum-entangled frequency. It can't be jammed." Jennings stared at her. The X-7 was a deeply classified experimental piece of DARPA technology. Its existence was known to only a handful of people on the base, himself included. That the janitor knew its name, let alone its function, was a shock that momentarily overrode the crisis. Thorne, who'd been pulled from the abortive mission and was now helping coordinate the base defense from a corner of the room, saw her and stormed forward. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. "I knew it! You're a spy! Get her away from that console!" He reached for her arm. He never touched her. Anya shifted her weight, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. Her right hand came up, not in a strike, but as a gentle guide, redirecting his momentum. Her left foot slid behind his, and with a slight pivot of her hips, she used his own forward motion to unbalance him. Thorne, a 200-pound man trained in hand-to-hand combat, found himself stumbling sideways, his grab meeting only empty air. He crashed into a bank of servers, his pride wounded far more than his body. He looked up at her, utterly bewildered. The move had been effortless, a simple application of physics, executed with biomechanical perfection. Anya paid him no further attention. She looked directly at Jennings. "Colonel, the A-10 pilot is Major Kane. He was the lead test pilot for the Echo Zero program. That plane is equipped with a prototype X-7 receiver. I am the only person on this base who can interface with it. Give me a headset." Out of time and out of options, Jennings made a decision. He pointed to Vance. "Get her a headset, now." Vance, who had watched the exchange with Thorne in wide-eyed shock, scrambled to comply. He ripped his own headset off and handed it to her, then quickly rerouted the input to the X-7's auxiliary port, his fingers working on muscle memory. Anya put on the headset, adjusting the microphone with practiced ease. Her fingers flew across the keyboard of the auxiliary console, typing in a long string of alphanumeric characters, an access key that bypassed every standard security protocol. The console, previously dark, flickered to life, its screen glowing with an interface no one else in the room recognized. She closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing steady and deep. When she opened them, they were focused, stripped of all emotion. She was no longer a janitor. She was a weapon. "Call sign Warthog Actual," she spoke into the microphone, her voice a calm, clear signal in the storm of chaos. "This is Echo Zero. Authenticate Crimson Phoenix." For a few agonizing seconds, there was only static. Then, a voice, heavily distorted but unmistakable, crackled through the main speakers, silencing the entire room. "Echo Zero. My God. Is that you? This is Warthog Actual. We are authenticated. We are flying blind up here. Comms are a mess. What is your status, over?" Anya's eyes flicked to a small, independent thermal imaging feed that was still pulling fragmented data from a hardened sensor on the roof. It was a chaotic mess of heat signatures, but she could read it like a book. "Warthog Actual," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "Your status is active. I am your eyes now." The tactical takeover was complete. The janitor was in command. "Warthog Actual, I have targets for you." Anya's voice filled the command center, a stark contrast to the howling wind and distant gunfire. She was looking at the flickering thermal display, her mind processing the chaotic blobs of heat into a coherent battlefield map. "Vector to grid coordinate 34 Kilo 7. You will find a concentration of enemy forces massing near the southern gate. Target is a technical stationary painted with a friendly insignia. It is a decoy. The real threat is a mortar team 20 meters to its west, concealed in a ditch." Major Kane's voice came back, strained but trusting. "Copy, Echo Zero, engaging." Thorne, having picked himself up, staggered toward the console, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "You can't do that. My reserve squad is positioned near that gate. You'll kill them." Anya turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. For the first time, he saw what was behind the mask of invisibility she wore. It was not anger or fear. It was a cold, absolute certainty, the look of a master craftsman who has no time to explain her work to a child. "Your reserve squad reported moving to the western barracks 13 minutes ago to counter a breach," she stated flatly. "The enemy is using your old radio signature to broadcast false position data. I am tracking the unique heat signatures of your team's power packs on a separate spectral band. They are exactly where they should be. The mortar team is not." Before Thorne could respond, a sound tore through the storm, a sound unlike any other. It was not the roar of a jet engine, but a deep guttural snarl that seemed to come from the sky itself. It was the sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the A-10's primary weapon, firing. The barrage lasted only 2 seconds, but in that time, over 100 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary shells slammed into the earth, even through the thick concrete walls. And the raging sandstorm, the impact was felt as a deep vibration in the floor. On Anya's thermal display, the cluster of hot signatures representing the mortar team vanished, replaced by a single brilliant white flare of intense heat. "Target neutralized," Anya said, her voice unchanged. "Warthog actual, shift your focus. I have a new tasking. Enemy sappers are placing charges on the northern perimeter wall, using the storm for cover. I need a low-altitude strafing run. Danger close." "Danger close?" The pilot's voice was tight. "Echo 0, our own people are 50 meters from that wall." "I am aware," Anya replied. "The charges are on the exterior of the wall. Your angle of attack will be from the northeast, heading southwest. The trajectory of your rounds will be directed away from friendly forces. I need you to place your fire within 5 meters of the outer wall." "Can you do it, Major?" There was a pause. "For you, Echo 0? I can put it on a dime. On my way." Thorne could only stand and watch. His authority, his experience, his entire identity as a battlefield commander rendered utterly irrelevant. This woman was not just communicating with the pilot. She was plugged into the aircraft's soul. She saw what it saw, knew what it could do. She spoke of angles and trajectories with an intimacy that defied belief. He was witnessing a new form of warfare, a symphony of destruction conducted by a woman he thought was there to clean his messes. He watched as she guided the A-10 with the precision of a surgeon, her calm commands systematically dismantling the enemy assault piece by piece, her voice the only anchor in a world of chaos. She was not just saving the base, she was rewriting the rules of battle in real time. As the last of the enemy forces were routed by the A-10's relentless assault, the sandstorm began to recede, its fury spent. The wind died down to a mournful sigh, and a weak gray light filtered into the battered command center. The electronic warfare attack ceased as abruptly as it had begun, and the screens flickered back to life, displaying scenes of wreckage and stillness on the perimeter. The battle was over. Silence descended, thick and heavy. The only sound was the soft hiss of the open comms linked to the A-10. Major Kane's voice came over the speakers, filled with a weary reverence. "Echo 0. It's good to hear your voice again. You saved us all today." "You performed within expected parameters, Major," Anya replied, her tone as clinical as ever. "Return to base." She reached up and removed the headset, placing it carefully on the console. The connection was severed. She stood for a moment, her shoulders slumping just a fraction, the immense weight of the battle settling upon her. The room was a wreck of shattered glass, sand, and discarded equipment. The operators, who had been fighting for their lives moments before, now stood amidst the debris, staring at her. Their faces held a complex cocktail of emotions: shock, awe, and a deep, unnerving sense of shame. They looked at her, then at Thorne, who was leaning against the server bank he'd crashed into, his expression utterly broken. He was not looking at Anya, but at the floor, his worldview shattered into a million pieces. He had built his identity on a foundation of strength and superiority, and a janitor had just saved him, his men, and his base with a level of competence he could not even begin to comprehend. Colonel Jennings walked slowly toward Anya, navigating the debris. He stopped in front of her, his uniform covered in dust, his face etched with exhaustion and wonder. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw not the janitor, but the quiet, coiled strength she had kept hidden. What are you?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before she could answer, Master Sergeant Cole emerged from the back of the room. He had ridden out the storm in the hardened server cage, keeping the auxiliary power running. He held a clean, folded rag in his hand. He walked past the colonel and stopped in front of Anya. He held out the rag. "You missed a spot," he said, a small, knowing smile touching the corners of his mouth. It was not a joke. It was a sign of respect, an acknowledgement from one quiet professional to another that the job, no matter what it was, had been done well. Anya took the rag, her fingers closing around the soft cotton. It was the highest form of praise she could have received. Later, in the formal debriefing, the truth came out. Colonel Jennings stood before the assembled command staff and the operators of Alpha Team. "For the past 6 weeks," he began, his voice ringing with authority, "we have had a guest on this base, operating under a cover of absolute secrecy. This individual was here to conduct the final field diagnostics on the Echo Zero combat interface system." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Sergeant Thorne," he said, his gaze falling on the man who stood rigidly at attention. "Your conduct toward this individual was unprofessional, compromised operational security, and was a disgrace to this command. You are formally reprimanded. Your command of Alpha Team is suspended, pending a full inquiry." Thorne did not flinch, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He had been so sure of his place in the world, and now the ground had been swept out from under him. Jennings continued, "I would like to introduce you all to the person you knew as our janitor. This is Dr. Anya Sharma, the lead designer and chief architect of the Echo Zero program." Anya stood beside the colonel, now dressed in a simple but official flight suit. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired. The men of Alpha Team, the ones who had smirked and mocked and dismissed her, could not meet her eyes. They stared at the floor, at the walls, at anything but the woman who had held all of their lives in her calm, steady hands. The perception had not just shifted, it had been shattered and rebuilt. Respect, silent and profound, had been earned. Days later, the base had settled back into its tense routine. The broken windows were replaced, the perimeter wall was patched, and the memory of the attack was already being filed away into after-action reports. Anya was in her small, sterile quarters, a room no different from the one she'd had under her cover identity. She sat on her bunk, methodically cleaning a small, complex piece of diagnostic equipment with a microfiber cloth. Her movements were the same as when she had mopped the floors, economical, precise, and focused. A soft knock came at her door. It was Airman Vance. He stood in the doorway, shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to look her in the eye. "Ma'am, Dr. Sharma, he stammered. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how we treated you. We were idiots." Anya paused her cleaning and looked up. Her expression was unreadable, but there was no malice in it. She simply nodded, a small, quiet acknowledgement of his apology. Vance, emboldened, took a step into the room. "There's one thing I don't understand," he said. "During the attack, in the command center, with everything falling apart, how did you stay so calm?" Anya looked down at the complex circuitry in her hands, then back up at the young airman. She considered his question for a moment, her mind searching for the simplest, most accurate answer. She found it. "The machine does not care about your ego," she said, her voice soft but clear. "It only cares about the math.